We've been discussing the Southern Democrats and their move to becoming Republicans. Today, we discuss the Democratic Party's savior, or the Republican Party's savior. It depends on how you look at it. I think we've discussed the Southern strategy before, right? At least a few times, maybe. It's a tactic that actually predates Nixon, who used it, and we'll talk about that. The suffragettes used the tactics when they courted white suffragette women and it kicked out black suffragettes, kicked them straight to the curb in the quest to gain the right to vote. But let's talk about Nixon, shall we? Southern Democrats, well, any Democrat really, was looking for a political party that was going to stay true to their beliefs: white supremacy, segregation, keeping blacks disenfranchised. I mean, was that so hard? Was it? The Democratic Party was no longer that party since Truman desegregated the armed troops and ended segregation of the federal government, and Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They needed a hero. They needed somebody who stayed true to their beliefs. And that man was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a member of the Republican Party. He previously served as a representative and senator from California and was the 36th vice president from 1953 to 1961 under Dwight D. Eisenhower. He became president of the United States in 1969, and his tenure ended in disgrace with his resignation over the Watergate scandal. Some presidents know how to resign. I'm just saying. Denouncing the forced busing policy that was used to enforce school desegregation, Richard Nixon courted populist conservative Southern whites with what is called the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy was a Republican Party electoral strategy to increase political support among white voters in the South by appealing to the racism against blacks. As the civil rights movement and dismantling of Jim Crow laws in the 1950s and the 1960s visibly deepened existing racial tensions in much of the southern United States, Republican politicians such as presidential candidates Richard Nixon and Barry Goldwater developed strategies that successfully contributed to the political realignment of many white conservative voters in the South who had traditionally supported the Democratic Party. The strategy also helped to push the Republican Party much more to the right. They leaned heavily on the racism that white people had toward black people. And this is where we get dog whistles. This is where we get that from too. This Southern strategy, this time period. Okay. And like I said before, law and order. They're really talking about black people. These were middle-aged, middle-class white men speaking to middle-class white America, regardless of where they lived. And they were pulling Democrats away from where they normally voted into the Republican Party. This is when we see the switch. It had been coming. It'd been coming since FDR's New Deal. Then we see it with Harry S. Truman's civil rights platform being introduced into the Democratic Party. We've got Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat, signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. By the time we get to Nixon, Democratic voters are primed. They're looking for a savior. And Richard Nixon, it's like he appeared out of the heavens, speaking their language. The Republican Party goes further to the right. Those in the Democratic Party that wanted to continue to be racist, segregationists, jump ship, and they go to the Republican Party. Those who were on board with this new liberal platform stayed in the Democratic Party. Now, that's high level. It's a high level version of how yesterday's Democrats became today's Republicans and how yesterday's Republicans became today's Democrats. Well, actually, how yesterday's Democrats became liberals. I think that's more accurate, right? Of course, there's nuances, right? There's nuances. This was just the high points. This was just the high points. I think we're going to talk about the Solid South. I've been wanting to do that for a while. I think we're going to talk about the Solid South, and I think we're going to talk about the Southern strategy more in depth. So look for that in the near future, okay? Real quick, as a reminder, I'm selling blankets, and I've also got lectures out there. I'm raising rent for March. Some things fell through. Some things are taking longer than I thought it would, but that's okay. It'll all come together. Click on my Linktree link to see what's out there. And I thank you in advance. Talk to y'all later.